Hi everyone, so today I'll be doing an election prediction for the two second place candidates in the 2016 election. So obviously that's Bernie Sanders versus Ted Cruz. So yeah, let's just get right to it. Obvious states that we know: Western Coast, Alaska. Obvious states for the respective candidate. Texas. Normally I would leave that as a toss-up, but I'm going to give it to Ted Cruz just because of the fact he's from that state, so I think, he would do well there. Actually, Georgia's a toss-up. Yeah, but right now I'm just going through all the safe states. Just these states that have overwhelming majorities. And I think this is the map. So 200 electoral votes for Bernie Sanders, 163 for Ted Cruz. Now, let me just say this. Sanders will win. Okay, now I'm going to explain why. Arizona and Georgia, and probably Iowa included, those are three states that are more likely than not to stay Republican. We can actually just put it as, we can actually, I apologize for that. We can, we can actually just put it as likely for Ted Cruz. I mean, he won the Iowa caucus. So I do think those voters would come out and vote for him. They are not the kind of voter that likes Bernie Sanders. So, yeah. But going over to a state like Colorado, that is a state that I do believe would be likely for Bernie Sanders to get. Progressive state, increasing demographics that Latino population, young population, those are two areas where Democrats do very, very well in. But then going over to a state like Nevada, I'm going to say that one is leaning Sanders. I wouldn't consider it to be likely, just leaning, because Ted Cruz does have a chance, but I do think that in the end Bernie Sanders would narrowly edge Nevada out. Then going over to Maine and Nebraska, I actually do think that Maine's 2nd congressional district would go to Bernie Sanders in a likely fashion, just because he's from the area. He knows that kind of person. But then going over to Nebraska, I do think, again, a likely leaning Sanders vote, because he will do very, very well in some of the toss-up Midwestern states. The classic example is Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. But yeah, now all the states are on the eastern side of the thing. So obviously, I actually do think Nevada would come out. It would be in leaning Sanders, just because he's from the area. Like, people don't really understand that. Ted Cruz, he'll do very well in his surrounding area. Bernie Sanders, very well in his surrounding area. And part of Bernie Sanders' surrounding area is the Rust Belt. I do think that those states would be leaning Sanders, because I do think he can appeal to that kind of person, just because he's from the area. He has that kind of message, and I do think he would carry out those states. But let's be honest, I do think Ohio would go to Ted Cruz. It's kind of one of those toss-ups that lean Republican. just one of those states. But then going over to a state like North Carolina, another state where I think that Ted Cruz could edge things out in North Carolina. But then going over to Virginia, I do think that would be a likely state for Bernie Sanders. Unless Ted Cruz does some serious campaigning in Virginia, getting out this base, I think that Bernie Sanders would run it up in the area in the northern part of the state. But then going down to Florida, that is one state where I think Bernie Sanders could win. Actually, I would just leave that as a toss-up, but it would be ever so slightly leaning Bernie Sanders. But Ted Cruz definitely has a possibility in Florida. If he does hardcore campaigning in Florida, he definitely has that kind of possibility to win in the state of Florida. I do think Florida is just one of those toss-ups that, Anyway, even if Ted Cruz wins in Florida, it won't be enough to get him elected, unless, this is what, if Ted Cruz wants to get elected, he needs to keep all the likely states. Well, firstly, keep all the safe states, obviously. Then he needs to keep the likely states. So that is Arizona, Georgia, and Iowa. And then what he needs to do, he needs to keep all of his leaning states. He needs to fight real hard in Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida. And then the last thing he needs to do is pick off a blue state. It's either Nevada wouldn't get him there. Wisconsin would. Wisconsin plus Nevada would work. Wisconsin plus Nebraska second would work. Michigan would work. Pennsylvania would work. Virginia would work. I think the most likely state he would be to flip is Nevada plus Nebraska second. But then, you know what? He still needs to win one more state. And the most likely state for that to be? Probably Wisconsin. But I actually do think that those are states that would actually end up going to Bernie Sanders. So, final electoral map, 309 for Sanders, 229 for Ted Cruz. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you all in my next vid.